why teach coding and programming to English students? Well, one of these is a long-term goal. DH is going to get better and better and better over time. The more that humanists are able to converse intelligently with computer scientists, the more you understand the way that computer scientists think, the better you can work with them and develop cool things with them. So DH is collaborative, as we've talked about. Collaboration from the humanities perspective requires digital literacy. Twine is an awesome way of developing digital literacy fast and in a humanities-friendly kind of a way. One of the lines that I use again and again resonates with me and seems to resonate with others. Culture is being made digitally more and more today. It's just a fact. To engage critically, which is what we are supposed to do in the humanities, with culture means you should know how it's made. You can't engage critically, intelligently with digital culture unless you have some sense of how it's actually constructed. And if you approach coding from a humanities perspective and programming from a humanities perspective, you actually approach it in a different and better and more interesting way. I have a lot of students who take computer science, decide that it's not for them, that the approach to these questions is not interesting to them, drop out and end up in my classes, where we are not approaching programming just to solve problems, but to explore issues and to be creative. It's surprising how different we do this. I'm teaching a programming class right now in which all three of these students happen to be enrolled. When I tell my computer science colleagues about this class, they're just like, I do not understand how you could possibly call this a programming class. We're learning all the same stuff, we're just not solving problems with it. We're exploring problems and creating problems. How do you teach coding to English students? Well, as I think maybe the three of you are a little bit less susceptible to this, but most English students are terrified of math. You cannot jump straight into a programming language like Python. A lot of people in English are in English because they fear math. So Twine is a great way to get into this stuff. It's like it tricks you into thinking mathematically. You don't even realize what's going on. So what is it? Twine is free, it's open source, it's easy to use. You make interactive fiction or video games, as in many ways I prefer to call them. It's like it's a digital platform for making choose your own adventure stories. This is the developer view of Riley's game, for instance. You make a lot of different passages of a story and then you link them together. You can link one passage to a million other passages. You can create very complex links between them. Why Twine? It's web-based, meaning you don't have to install any software. You can just use it in your web browser. It even works on your phone. And it publishes to standard web formats. When you publish your Twine game, it publishes as HTML. Double-click on it, it opens up in a browser. Put it on the web, it loads in anyone else's browser. So for instance, Riley's game, which we'll talk more about, here it is, and it's in Safari, but it works in every browser, and it'll work on your phone. The key thing about Twine, it is easy to use. You can do a 5-minute demo on it and everyone will be able to make their own game. But it's not too easy to use. It makes you work. And the kind of work that you need to do is you need to learn coding in order to make your game nice. So, and this is the key. It's like, do I want to learn HTML and CSS, the languages of the web, for their own sake? No. Do I want to learn them if I need to in order to make my game look awesome? Yes. People will do that. That works. And let's say I want my story game to have an extra cool element like a hidden key that if you pick it up, you can get into a room. To do that, you need to learn some programming. There you go. You've got the whole thing. So again, sorry, Riley, developer view of one of Riley's pages has a bunch of HTML stuff stuck in there. You don't need to do any HTML in Twine, but if you want to, you can stick it in and it works just fine. This is the thing that controls how Riley's game looks, and it's CSS. You use this to make a web page. It's the same skills. Apply to a job that requires CSS skills. You made a Twine game, you have them. And here's a bunch of programming stuff, setting variables to various values, also in Riley's game. Another key reason why to use Twine, and I'm partly joking about this, is that it was not developed by digital humanists, and it was not supported by large amounts of government funding. I find that most of the stuff that is made by DHers and funded by huge agencies, and maybe some of us can think of pertinent examples of this, tends to be hyper-specialized stuff for research that is not easy to use. Twine was developed by a community of people who wanted to tell stories and made an amazing platform to do it. So that Twine community, they're digital humanists, but they don't call themselves that. They're people who want to use technologies to make something happen in the world and to change human situations, as we talked about earlier. So Twine is best known, as in this 2014 New York Times piece, as a platform that people who lack the traditional programming skills to make video games, and the video game making community is very demographically uniform, shall we say, they are able to use Twine to tell the kinds of stories that they want to tell without possessing those kinds of technical skills. From that article, while roughly 75% of developers at traditional video game companies are male, many of the most prominent Twine developers are women, making games whose purpose is to explore personal perspectives and issues of identity, sexuality, and trauma that mainstream games rarely touch on, or never touch on. Like, very seldom do mainstream games touch on these issues, right? An amazing perspective that if you teach Twine, I encourage you to assign this book by Anna Anthropy, Rise of the Video Game Zinesters, How Freaks, Normals, Amateurs, Artists, Dreamers, Dropouts, Queers, Housewives, and people like you are taking it back in art form. It's about Twine, the whole thing. She writes, as a queer transgendered woman in 2012, I have to strain to find any game that's about a queer woman, to find any game that resembles my own experience. Mostly video games are about men shooting men in the face. And she makes a link between Twine video games in particular and zine culture, especially of the 90s, where people are telling their own stories through cheaply made photocopied zines. She says, I like to think of games as zines, as transmissions of ideas and culture from person to person, as personal artifacts instead of impersonal creations by teams of 45 artists and 15 programmers, as was the case in Gears of War 2, one of these games that she points out where men shoot men in the face. A final note, Gamergate, which I guess it's still going on, it never goes away, this large-scale social media-based attempt basically to keep women and anyone who's not a straight young white male out of gaming. Twine played a huge role in Gamergate because Depression Quest, which in many ways is the game that started Gamergate, was made in Twine. So another advantage of teaching Twine is that many of your students already know about Twine, will have played games that were made in Twine, and maybe are already taking their first steps in making their own Twine games. How I taught Twine, it actually wasn't that much work. 2.5 hours of instruction on how HTML and CSS works. Painful hours of instruction at times, but we plowed through it. A little under 4 hours of in-class instruction on Twine, and that included discussion of narrative theory, hypertext theory, and analysis of Twine games. So it wasn't all just teaching the skills, but a lot of it was engaging with the theory and the actual games themselves. I made very detailed written handouts for every technical aspect of Twine because I find that teaching this stuff in class doesn't work. You show it in class once, but you need to have instructions that people can take away and reproduce at their own time. And videos were very important, just showing screen grabs of how this all works. And those have proven very popular. Recently, I noticed that I have well over 1,000 hits on a lot of these YouTube videos, and lots of people are leaving me comments and demanding that you're wrong about this. And then every now and then I have to go in and look and no, I'm right. Send me your code. We'll figure it out. But I have a lot of people who are now sending me their questions a lot about how Twine works. This is the web page that I made that has all of the PDFs and the instructions and the videos. That's what one of the PDFs looks like. That's a screenshot from a video. And finally, before I pass things over, there were 2 projects in this. This is an intro to DH class that I taught. The first was called the Stupid Twine Game, and the idea was for people to be able to make a game and just play around with Twine and to have no expectations that it needed to be serious. I find attaching words like stupid to project, or the first project in HTML was called an ugly 90s website. Those words really help. Those words really help people to just chill out and learn how it works and then do something serious later. And so you get to see the serious ones, but each one of these 3 people also made a stupid Twine game first, which are funny, and I remember each of those. In some ways, they're not better, but they were all very, very good. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to pass it over to 3 students, so I'll introduce them now. Jackie made a game called Riot Kid. Erika made a game called Morphtations. pretty awesome name. And Riley made a game called Driving Alone at Night. So they will all come up and talk a little bit about what they liked about Twine or what the advantage was of learning through Twine. And then there's some screenshots.
I made Riot Kid, and what I find powerful about Twine is how its accessibility invites diversity. So, like Hammond said, anyone can access Twine online. You don't need much technical skills to start learning. So, that invites anyone to self publish their own narratives. And in this way, you get narratives that would typically go unseen and unheard, and now they're uncensored and completely uninhibited. So that's what I think is super rad about Twine. My game was mostly inspired by Depression Quest, which simulates what it's like to have depression, and you have a series of choices which lead to different outcomes. The difference with my game is that I'm simulating the experience of aging out of foster care. So the concept for my game came from feeling like foster youth are very misunderstood, and so are our experiences. So I thought with my game, I would be able to recreate those experiences and place the reader in the mindset of a young person who has just aged out of care, and to understand the choices, to provoke empathy from both the to provoke empathy from both people that have never experienced those things, and to provoke a sense of understanding and kind of break down that alienation that youth themselves that have experienced this feel. So this is a little bit of my game. Like I said, the whole concept of it is it's your 18th birthday, you've just aged out of foster care. What do you do? So it's not like really a happy day. And you start there, and then you have a series of choices of where you can go. Here's a shot of this page that I made, and it's all about like the character's best friend and how they've been like their only stability they've ever had in their life. And like it's like a very white, like my whole idea, I want to have like a teen voice, so it's kind of like this YA like best friend, and just to really like tap into like the voice of a teenage youth. Mm. Here's another one. One of the possible options you have in the game is to start a band. So that's kind of this idea of like creating your own future and finding an outlet for your frustration, and just coping with trauma and coping with, being on your own, and a lot of that DIY ethic that I really related with in class and just growing up. So here's like a shot of that.
And music plays when you
Oh
get that
yeah.
age, yeah.
Yeah, and that was a big thing for me. When I knew I was going to put music in it, like I right away knew I wanted Outsider from the Ramones, just because it like was like how I always like felt and probably will always feel, and but just is really like proud of it, like I'm an outsider, but I'm kind of proud of it. And then this is kind of like one of the darker outcomes. This is one of the last passages before the end of the game. So if you start a band, you actually get offered heroin, and you can choose to try heroin or not. And if you do choose to try heroin, you get a really negative outcome. And so this is kind of like you hitting rock bottom. But the awesome thing is that you can keep using, or you can start over again. And then you can see what other choices lead you to. Here's another shot of a train ride. The train ride from you get offered to go to university if you make another set of choices, and this is a really emotional train ride where you're just kind of processing the fact that you're out in the world on your own, and you're going to really take on this huge task of going to university. And if you go to San Diego State, you get to start a zine club. Which is a real thing. So this is very much inspired on personal experiences, not all, but And yeah, that was my concept. Making it was at times very emotional, because I had to tap into like many of the feelings and experiences that I felt growing up. I felt like I had to like take myself like back to when I was 18 to really make this game. And frustrating to work with coding, not being familiar with it at all. but exciting and empowering at the same time. I feel like I found my voice through it, and I feel like I found like this ownership of my identity through making this game. And yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Erika, and I'm also an English major at SDSU. And I'm one of those English majors who was not very comfortable with math or technology or programming in any form. And I've realized now that I've been doing this longer that not all people who major in the humanities are this way. And I personally know someone who's an English major who used to be a computer science major, and she is very comfortable with coding and programming in her computer, but I was not. Um, so this is why I was really drawn to Twine, because when we first started getting introduced to it, I got really excited because I saw it more as a way to create cool little interactive fiction games and not as like not as programming. So in a way, I kind of tricked myself by getting into Twine because I was doing programming, but in my mind, I was still doing English, and part of that was because you would have these boxes and you just put in little parts of a story and then you make a little path and then a little arrow goes and then more of a story. And so I was creating those paths and I was creating how it looked and designing it. But I just saw it as more of a fun way to make stories. So in that way, it was kind of a bridge for me between English and programming because it really eased me into it. And now I'm a lot more comfortable with programming, and so I'm even chose to take the literary programming class that we're all in now, and I never would have done that like ever a couple years ago. So my game is called Morphtations, and what I kind of wanted to do when I made this, I was really thinking about how different people saw reality and like how your experiences or what you choose to do in your free time can shape how you feel about yourself. And so I made this game about a guy named Beryl, and he's really boring and he doesn't really have a social life or friends or any hobbies. And so to kind of convey this, I made every screen. This is one of the only pictures. There's not a lot of pictures because I wanted it to be boring on purpose. So it's a gray background and just white and black little things. And most of these that you see on here, if you click on like apartment or Seattle, it just talks about it a little bit. It doesn't really actually do anything. So I don't really give you a lot of choices as the player. You just have to kind of go along with what I want you to go along with, and it's kind of boring. But the thing about Beryl is that he likes to watch television, and so he kind of escapes into television when he watches it, and it makes him well, he lives vicariously through the people that he watches on television. Oop, it's this one. So, like, this is a screenshot of when one of the times he gets home from work and he goes and sits on his couch and he turns on the TV. And so now it's pink and the print is bigger or the font is bigger in different colors. And so this is one of the only times you get a lot of choices and you get to really navigate between the different channels that you choose to watch, and it makes Beryl really happy. And it's really the only point in the game that you have a lot of choices. But the goal of this game that I had was to make you had two options. You could either have Beryl, through your choices, turn into someone who makes friends and goes out and lives in the real world, or you could, through your choices, make him stay in this kind of gray, monotonous, boring life. And so this is the preferred ending that I have, and it's blue, and it's not really fancy, but it's like, congratulations, you're closer to having friends because he chooses to go to a picnic instead of watching television, which is exciting for him. And so I just was really happy that I was able to make this because for me it's like there's different colors and I was able to make it different colors and it works on my computer and it's a game and I made it, and I was really proud of this as an English major who had never attempted any sort of that thing ever. But yeah, so Twine is exciting. I like it.
And my Twine is called Driving Alone at Night, which, as you have probably guessed, is about driving alone at night. And it's a story about this girl. Not necessarily a girl, but like the you player is about to graduate college, and you're kind of at a literal and figurative crossroads in your life, and you're just thinking about it. And here is the title page, which I'm really proud of. And if you looked at it in a web browser, all the images are actually GIFs, so they're moving. And learning to do that was a real challenge. But yeah, and from a planning perspective, using Twine is really different. We saw this image earlier, And as cool as it is to make choices, you learn really quickly that if you have multiple choices for every screen, all of a sudden you have 256 different endings because it's exponential and it's kind of a disaster, but it's cool. And you learn from it. And so learning to use Twine is something that becomes really intentional because you need to plan out your story. And it really made me think critically about how story functions and how choices lead to other choices. And we saw a screenshot earlier of one of my passages, and there were variables. So that was something where instead of ending up with 256 different options or whatever, I programmed it so once you finished a path, it would read where you were in the story and then lead you to a different path. So unlike Jackie and Erika's pieces of e-lit or their video games, you're going to be able to read everything I've written every single time because that's just how I coded it. But even though there is a lot of planning involved, I did a lot of improvisation as well. And I started to think a lot about how to convey different modes of thought in Twine. So, for example, I'm really interested in stream of consciousness and going off on tangents because it's how I talk and how I think and how I write often. So, for example, here, the bottom link you weighted is the only one that will lead you forward in the story, but the other ones are kind of like thought digressions, and you can go to learn more about the character if you go that way. And so I thought that was really interesting. And then I don't have a screenshot of it, but there's another scene where the you character of the story is having a panic attack, and you just have to click through the links really rapidly. And I thought that was really cool that not only could I talk about anxiety, but I could demonstrate it in a way. And I think that's one of the strengths of Twine is that you can talk about different modes of thoughts, and it lends itself to like telling stories that are less privileged by video games traditionally and are more diverse.
Wrap up super quickly. One of the things that's fun about Twine, as I've mentioned, is it can serve as a gateway drug to proper programming. Although proper programming, like I feel like Twine is still my favorite development platform for English students, but we're using this textbook, which we now have learned to hate. But anyway, a textbook designed for humanists in Python. So this is, for instance, just, sorry, Riley, again, just I grabbed some of Riley's code. So now they're writing stuff that really looks like code, and maybe they get a job because of this, or just it's empowering. The idea behind all of this is that being able to express yourself in code is empowering, and you can be part of conversations that you couldn't have been part of before. These are going to be too fast for you to actually copy down, but all the syllabi for all these things are all online, and I have links to stuff. And if you want to see how Twine works and want a quick demo, come and talk to any of us at any point today, and we will show you how it works. Thank you very much.